You'll never succeed. Those were the exact words my parents threw at me one night, their voices filled with disappointment. My father shook his head and my mother sighed. Together, they made me feel like I was nothing more than a burden. It wasn't the first time either. For as long as I could remember, they had a way of reminding me that I wasn't good enough. When I failed a test, it was proof that I was lazy. When I worked extra hours at a small job, they mocked me, saying I'd never go beyond washing dishes. Even when I shared my dreams, they laughed as if ambition was something I had no right to carry. My siblings were praised, celebrated, and lifted like stars. I was the shadow, the failure child, the one destined, according to them, to remain small. I can still hear my father's words. You'll never make it. You don't have what it takes. Stop pretending. Those words cut deep. They stayed with me at night, haunting me as I stared at the ceiling, wondering if they were right. But somewhere inside, a spark refused to die. A voice whispered, "One day you'll prove them wrong." So I stopped arguing. I stopped defending myself. Instead, I let their voices fade into the background while I poured everything into my work. Because I knew something they didn't. The exact words they used to break me were the very words I would use to build myself. And one day, those words, "You'll never succeed," would come back to silence them. Growing up in my parents' house meant living under constant comparison. My siblings were always the shining examples, the ones who made good grades, the ones who received applause at family gatherings, the ones who had a future. And then, there was I. Every mistake I made seemed to confirm their judgment. If my brother brought home a certificate, my parents would proudly frame it and hang it on the wall. If I brought home the same, they'd ask, "How long do you think this will last?" If my sister talked about her career plans, my parents nodded with approval. If I spoke about mine, they laughed, saying, "Stop dreaming, you'll never make it." It wasn't just words. It was the way they looked at me, like I was destined to fail before I even tried, like I was a disappointment they had to tolerate, not a son they could be proud of. Over time, I stopped expecting encouragement. I learned to keep my dreams to myself. When I worked late nights, they thought I was wasting time. When I saved every penny, they thought I was foolish. When I stayed quiet, they called me weak. But in truth, I was learning. I was learning how the world treated people who had nothing. I was learning the value of struggle, of sacrifice, of building from the ground up. And I was learning that sometimes, the people who are supposed to believe in you the most are the ones who doubt you the loudest. Those years of being ignored and underestimated hurt more than I can explain. But they also shaped me, because nothing motivates you more than being told you can't. And every time my parents said, "You'll never succeed," I quietly told myself, "Watch me." The older I grew, the louder their doubts became. When I picked up part-time jobs to support myself, my parents didn't see determination. They saw weakness. "Look at you," my father said once, shaking his head, "running around doing small jobs like a laborer. This isn't success, this is survival." They couldn't see the bigger picture. Those small jobs taught me discipline. They taught me how to manage time, how to stretch every coin, how to work under pressure. But to them, it was proof I was a failure. I still remember the day I told them I was thinking of starting something of my own. My mother laughed, actually laughed. "You? Start a business? You can't even manage your own life properly." My siblings joined in, mocking me like it was the funniest joke they'd ever heard. It stung. It always stung. But I didn't argue back. I had learned by then that words were useless against people who had already decided who you were. So I nodded, stayed silent, and carried on. What they didn't know was that every insult became fuel. Every laugh, every taunt, every reminder that I was nothing turned into fire inside me. I started working nights, saving whatever little I could. I studied quietly, reading books about business, finance, and self-growth while they thought I was wasting time. I listened, observed, and planned, all in silence. But silence is dangerous. It makes people think you've given up, when in reality you're building something they'll never see coming. And still, they didn't stop. At family gatherings, my parents would brag about my siblings, then glance at me with pity. "He's still figuring things out," they'd say, as if I wasn't standing right there. Relatives nodded, looking at me with that same mix of disappointment and pity. They didn't realize I wasn't figuring things out. I was building my way out. And one day, the very son they mocked as worthless would stand tall in front of them. Because nothing hurts more than being doubted by your own parents. And nothing feels sweeter than proving them wrong. The deeper I pushed myself, the more their disbelief grew. When I finally landed a decent job, one that paid enough for me to live on my own, I thought maybe, just maybe, my parents would acknowledge the effort. But instead, my father brushed it off. "It's just luck. Don't think this will last." When I got promoted, my mother scoffed, "Promotions don't mean success, don't fool yourself." And when I brought home my first real savings, my siblings mocked me. "That's it? You call this an achievement? You'll never catch up to us." It wasn't just doubt anymore, it was betrayal. They weren't simply underestimating me. They were actively tearing down every brick I laid. No matter what I did, no matter how far I came, in their eyes I was still the failure. One evening, during a family dinner, my father made a comment that cut deeper than all the rest. Surrounded by relatives, he said, "We've accepted that he'll never succeed. He's just not like his brother and sister." The room laughed, some out of politeness, some out of pity, and I sat there, smiling faintly, hiding the storm inside me. That night I walked home alone. My chest burned, not from shame, but from resolve. If my own family could humiliate me publicly, if they could erase all my efforts with a single sentence, then I no longer needed their validation. That was the turning point. From then on, I stopped trying to prove myself to them. I stopped waiting for their approval. Every insult became a reminder of why I needed to succeed, not for them, but for me. They had betrayed me not by refusing to support me, but by actively rooting for my failure. They wanted me to remain the shadow, the cautionary tale, the one they could point to and say, "See, not everyone makes it." But they didn't realize something. Betrayal doesn't always break you. Sometimes it shapes you. Sometimes it gives you the kind of fire that comfort never could. And that fire was already burning inside me. They wanted me to fail so badly that they forgot one thing. The more you try to bury someone, the stronger their roots grow. And mine were growing deeper by the day. After that humiliating dinner, I made myself a promise. I would no longer waste energy trying to earn their approval. Instead, I would focus entirely on building a life so undeniable that even their laughter couldn't touch it. I doubled down on work. Every spare hour was invested into learning new skills, taking side jobs, and studying markets most people ignored. I lived simply. No parties, no expensive clothes, no distractions. While my siblings flashed their latest purchases, I quietly stacked my savings. While my parents praised them for living well, I was preparing for something greater. Slowly, I began to invest. Small at first, a little into stocks, a little into real estate, a side hustle that turned into something bigger. I didn't announce anything. I didn't post online or brag to friends. I let the silence shield me, because silence was my greatest weapon. Years passed. My siblings grew comfortable, relying on the constant praise of our parents. But I was building, brick by brick, a foundation they couldn't see. Every late night, every sacrifice, every quiet decision brought me closer to something bigger than all their mockery combined. And I was patient. I didn't need quick validation. I wanted lasting success. Then came the opportunity I had been waiting for, a business investment that everyone else thought was too risky. I trusted my instincts, put everything I had into it, and worked like my life depended on it. And it paid off. Within a year, my investment multiplied. Within 2 years, it became an empire. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was thriving. But still, I stayed silent. Because I knew the day would come when the truth would reveal itself. I didn't have to go looking for revenge. Revenge was already preparing itself. I just needed to wait for the right moment. And when that moment came, When my parents and siblings once again tried to humiliate me in public, I would let the truth speak for itself. No anger, no shouting, just undeniable proof. Because the sweetest revenge isn't loud, it's calm, it's measured, and it leaves them with nothing left to say. It happened at another family gathering, the same living room where I had been mocked countless times, the same voices that had told me I would never make it. The evening started predictably. My parents bragged about my siblings, their jobs, their new cars, their vacations. Then, as always, the spotlight turned to me. My father smirked. And him? Well, he's still figuring things out. A ripple of laughter moved across the room. My siblings grinned, enjoying the show. Relatives shook their heads with pity, whispering that I was the disappointment. But this time, I didn't stay silent. I stood up calmly, reached into my bag, and pulled out a folder. Inside were documents, contracts, and recognition letters. I placed them on the table without a word. "What's this?" my uncle asked, flipping through the papers. His eyes widened. "Wait, this company? You own this?" Murmurs filled the room as the truth unfolded. My small investments, my so-called wasted time, had grown into a thriving business. The brand they had seen advertised, the property they had passed by on their way to work, the success they had praised in strangers. It was mine. My mother's face went pale. My father's smirk disappeared. My siblings froze, their arrogance crumbling into disbelief. I looked at them, my voice steady. "You told me I'd never succeed. You laughed, you mocked, you doubted me. But while you were busy underestimating me, I was busy building. And now the truth speaks louder than your words ever did." The room was silent. No laughter, no whispers, just stunned faces staring at the proof in front of them. For years, they had silenced me with their judgment. Now the truth had silenced them. And in that silence, I felt something I had never felt before. Freedom. Not just freedom from their doubt, but freedom from ever needing their validation again. Because in that moment, I realized I had already won. After that night, nothing was the same. My parents, once so quick to dismiss me, suddenly struggled to meet my eyes. My siblings, who had laughed the loudest, now kept their voices low around me. Relatives who once pitied me began whispering a different story, about how the failure had quietly surpassed everyone's expectations. But here's the thing. I didn't feel the need to rub it in. I didn't want to gloat or throw their words back at them, because the victory wasn't a tea in humiliating them. It was in finally being free from the weight of their judgment. For the first time in my life, I realized I no longer needed their approval. I no longer needed to prove anything. I had already proved it to myself. My father tried to soften his tone in the weeks that followed. "We didn't mean it the way it sounded," he said once. My mother muttered excuses. "We were just worried for you." My siblings avoided the subject altogether, but I remembered every word, every laugh, every time they told me I'd never succeed. Those scars don't fade easily. So, I didn't fight. I didn't argue. I simply created distance. I visited less, called less, stopped looking for praise that would never come. Instead, I poured myself into my work, my business, and the life I had built with my own hands. And strangely, the less I cared about their opinions, the lighter I felt. Because true success isn't about proving others wrong. It's about proving yourself right. And I had finally done that. As I stood in my office one evening, overlooking the city I had once been told I'd never conquer, I smiled to myself. My parents' voices no longer haunted me. Their disbelief no longer defined me. The truth had silenced them. And that silence was the sweetest sound I had ever heard. Looking back, I realize my story isn't just about success. It's about silence. The silence of being doubted, the silence of being mocked, and finally, the silence of proving everyone wrong. My parents told me I'd never succeed. They believed their words were final, like a stamp on my future. But here's the truth. Nobody's words can define you unless you let them. For years I carried their doubts like chains, believing maybe they were right. But each insult, each laugh, each rejection became fuel, and that fuel lit the fire that built the life I have today. The sweetest revenge wasn't in throwing their words back at them. It wasn't in humiliating them the way they humiliated me. The sweetest revenge was standing tall with undeniable proof of what I had achieved, and watching the disbelief in their eyes turn into silence. So if you've ever been told you're not good enough, remember this. Their disbelief is not your destiny. Your strength, your effort, your persistence will always speak louder than their doubts. And when the day comes that your truth is revealed, you won't need to shout. You won't need to argue. You'll simply stand there, and the silence around you will say everything. Because success doesn't need noise. It creates its own echo.